Today's video is about how I'm preparing for the event of a late frost. So this has got to do with when my plants that I've raised in the polytunnel are planted outside before the last frost date, which here in northern France is normally the 15th of May. So we've been having some really good weather this year. So for the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we've been having temperatures up to 28 degrees Celsius. So due to that, everything's been growing really well, and a lot of stuff that was in the polytunnel was ready a lot earlier than maybe it normally would have been. So instead of me potting things up into bigger pots, keeping it in the polytunnel, I decided to plant some things out, which I normally do every year before the last frost date. But over the last 3 or 4 years, I've learnt that being prepared is incredibly important. So when I'm planting things out before the last frost date, I'm now preparing for that, and I thought I'd share with you a few of the things that I'm now doing that have proven to be incredibly handy. So the first method that I wanted to show you involves plant pots. So these are things, this method is used for the plants that are sort of individual. So for example, if you've got courgettes or squashes or tomatoes that I'm going to show behind you, it works really well for those individual plants. So as you can see behind me, this is the tomato cage. Now the reason the plant pots are easier for me is because, as you can see, the bamboos make it really difficult to get a fleece over the top. So the plant pots work a lot better. And this goes for the same as if you've got a really large area to cover. Although the fleece works really well, it's not that practical if you've got a huge area to cover, unless you want to buy a huge amount of fleece. So basically what I do is, when I planted these out, I put alongside each plant one plant pot with a rock on top. So as you can see, running along, each tomato plant has got a pot next to it, both sides. And then what I do, if there was to be a risk of a frost that night, I shall come along and get the pot and carefully put the pot over the plant, pop the rock on top to make sure if there's wind it doesn't get taken off, and I basically go along each pot to each plant and cover them all up. And it takes me about, well, a couple of minutes to do this tomato cage. Now as you can see, some of the pots have got hay on top, for example this one here. The reason that is because some of the pots that I've got have got quite large holes in, so when you put it over the plant, sometimes the leaves are sort of resting against these holes so that the frost would actually get onto the leaf. So by putting a bit of hay over the top of each pot and then the rock, it's stopping the frost touching the leaves. So really simple, works really well for any plant like courgette. What I make sure is that the pot is tall enough or wide enough to not be squashing the plant, because otherwise you're going to be snapping stems and damaging the plant itself. So just making sure that the pot is big enough for the plant that you're putting it over, and then each morning take the pot off, and it's really that simple. So that's been working really well for me. A lot easier than trying to cover these individually with fleece netting or anything else. So that's how I'm doing that. Now the second method that I'm using, this is my winter garden. The top end I'm using for squashes, and I've got a similar setup over in the main vegetable patch for my courgettes and other bits and bobs. So this is what I mean when I say large areas. So you've got like an individual plant, but they're all quite spread out. So to use a fleece over that would be quite impractical, because you need a huge amount of fleece and there's not that many plants. So unless you want to be cutting individual squares, which I suppose you could do and then weigh down with rocks, the pots are easier because then they're just there. But actually in this setup, which is the Ruth Stout method, so we're planting through the hay. As you can see, the entire area here is covered with hay and we're planting through that. So really simple. all I need to do at night is come along, grab a little bit of hay, pop it over the top, make sure that the leaves are covered, and that's it. So I'm just making sure it's a light piece. I'm not grabbing huge great clumps to squash the plant, and that just protects them, and it takes me again a matter of minutes. So this also works really well. If you aren't using this method, but you have hay or straw that you could use, you could always have a bag set aside, and then at each night you could just come and pop a little patch over each of the plants. We have our own hay from here on the farm, so it's all directly from the farm, all organic and no nasties in it, so we know where it's come from. So we've got the supply of hay to be able to do this. But if you've got a local farmer, you could always ask him if he has a bale of straw or a bale of hay that you could use. So yeah, that's how I found that by preparing myself a little bit better for the event that a frost was to come along, I'm not in such a panic, it's more organised, and I can get things done really quick in a matter of minutes the night before the frost is due, and then everything can be uncovered really easily the next morning. So there you go, that's how I'm preparing for the event of a frost. I hope that's been useful for you. See you next time, guys. Bye.